Welcome. I'm Associate Professor of Art Roxana Pérez-Méndez, and this is Associate Professor of Art Marzán. We are faculty in the Art and Art History Department at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. We are delighted to be here today to introduce you to our project titled Pilgrimage as a Medium, Teaching Art on the Camino de Santiago. Since Hurricane Maria's catastrophic blow to our home in the island of Puerto Rico in 2017, we have worked collaboratively under the moniker Campo Research Studios. Campo investigates the intersection of contemporary art, environmental activism, anthropology, and political ecology. Within the academic studies of the visual in recent years, the looming threat of environmental, exacerbating social, political, racial, and economic crisis has grown ever more evident worldwide. With growing certainty, there is an increasing sense of urgency within multiple realms of the visual culture to use the power of creativity to raise the alarm to the multi-pronged threat to our very existence, opening the floodgates to a paradoxical and explosive boom in creative production. As Naomi Klein asks, can we imagine another way of responding to crisis other than the one of deepening inequality, brutal disaster capitalism, and mangled technophysics? As Campo, we propose a walking art practice can. Campo is both a title and an operating principle and brings together our joint interests in walking as a mode of art production and environmental activism in a series of walking art performances, curated walks, and artist-led pilgrimages. Campo encompasses our terrestrial concerns: land, social justice, equality, the earth, serving as a reminder to our commitment to tread upon it lightly. It is a social art practice, meaning it exists outside of the gallery setting, built upon Adrienne Marine Brown's emergent strategy principles that engage with the social landscape around us more responsibly.
What is then a walking art practice? Walking practices have been and are being used by many artists in order to discover and explore a specific territory, city, and geography, or to pursue an experience of having both the body and mind aware of the place they occupy, and simultaneously aware of their process of being in motion. Walking art practice moves the body into the space and flow of the public, to be observed by the public, becoming a public body. There are multiple types of walking art practices, from collective walking within the local to spiritual walks in search of the self, from the political use of walking to a poetic subtle act, and from its deployment as a methodology of discourse to its understanding as a position and attitude.
In his 1934 book, Art as Experience, John Dewey, a philosopher and early proponent of embodied education, argued that art is the most effective mode of communication that exists. Art involves both the audience and the artist engaging in an intimate union of doing and undoing. That makes the experience what it is. Dewey said, to perceive, a beholder must create his own experience. This means ordering the elements that experience into a whole, just as the artist is selected, simplified, clarified, abridged, and condensed according to their own interest. Therefore, art is a form of communication through which people learn about each other's similarities and differences, break through some of the barriers to understanding and awareness, and develop some of the commonalities that define a community. Whatever path the work of art pursues, it, just because it is full and intense of experience, keeps alive the power to experience the common world in its fullness. Art is part of life and assumes that art is performative. If we keep these words in mind, one can say that art is a condition of life. As we perform life, we perform art. In the 1970s New York art scene, the artist Tershing Shea performed inside and outside of his studio, actions such as 1-year performances and a 13-year plan. Using the long durations of time as context for his work, he united art and life simultaneously. His performances, similar to other artists working in the same vein, took over his life. We can say the same thing about our own practice. To walk is to make and experience art. It is a form of communication and a path of understanding, a unique form of experience that carries a significant potential to shape individuals and societies.
Walking art practice is political. It is an occupation of public space and a privilege assigned to the few. As we walk, we explore together, as Puerto Ricans, the ways wilderness, American or otherwise, is used under colonialism, the discourse of land ownership and development, natural and human resource extraction, natural and cultural barriers, and classism, racism, and political borders that serve to separate us from the land and nature, denying a form of ethical, ecological citizenship.
Walking art practice is ethical. The ability to walk is a common trait shared by all upright humans, existing deep within our brain development, whether one is physically able to walk or not. To walk is to choose to reject modernity's and capitalism's global obsessions, resistance to contemporary values of speed, and resistance to the imperative to constantly be connected. Out in the landscape, away from the edges of town, a walking practice allows for a kind of reflective capacity to grow.
A pilgrimage is a devotional practice consisting of a prolonged journey, often undertaken on foot, toward a destination of significance. It is a transient experience, removing the participant from their origin and identity, becoming a pilgrim. The means or motivation in undertaking a pilgrimage might vary, but the act blends the physical and the spiritual into a singular experience. A medium refers to both the type of art, like a painting, sculpture, or printmaking, as well as the materials an artwork is made from. In using pilgrimage as a medium, the walking associated with the pilgrimage act is an aesthetic tool to generate meaningful and transformative experience. In our practice, pilgrimage also requires a reorientation of research towards flexibility, contemplation, experimentation, and socially responsive participatory practice. In terms of process, there are 4 main areas in pilgrimage that we focus on: setting the intention, defining the destination, walking, and the return. While there is no prescription in modern pilgrimage, there has to be an intention behind it, whether that be personal, physical, emotional, or global. A pilgrimage by nature is intensely personal, and students being at the start of their own life journey may not know how to do that. In the next section, we will walk through our program, why we chose the Camino de Santiago, and some of the projects that guided us along the way.
In 2018, as part of Campo, we developed a 6-week program that takes students along the length of the Camino de Santiago for a cultural and artistic journey. This study abroad program examines the importance of the pilgrimage road to Spain's and Europe's self-definition within the global context, and as a lens to examine our own current condition. With the aid of literary and historical texts and art and art historical references, the course posits the rituals and landscapes of this ancient pilgrimage road against the 21st century rituals and landscapes that surround it.
Out of all of the pilgrimage paths that form places of transformation, we chose the Camino de Santiago as a site for a variety of reasons that are beyond the surface of this 500-mile route. Of course, the Camino has a global audience, people from all ages, all walks of life, from many parts of the world, who come to participate in it, but also for the facilities and infrastructure to support 15 students and faculty, and for its long-standing history that touches on deep time and deep archaeology of place. The geological history of this path spans Neolithic time to the present, the vestiges of early humanity, the calming sentient presence of the distant picos on the horizon against the contemporary backdrop of a cosmopolitan Spain, all work together to create a stage, shifting forward and backwards in time like a celestial DJ. The students traverse space that are relevant to today's most timely concerns. But the Camino de Santiago as a ground, like a canvas is to a painting, is a spatial moment that when it incorporates a living way, is more than the mere material component of arrows, paths, and sites. These sites that dot along the Camino have been likened to a string of galleries or open-air museums, filled with history, time, local color, national identity. They all have the capacity to serve as metaphors for much of the contemporary issues that our work intends to exercise. And by floating in and out of view, again settling into a liminal space, allows students to not be burdened for too long with a complex idea or concept. Lastly, we cannot forget that medieval pilgrims that walked the Camino de Santiago were also craftsmen, often commissioned for artworks of practical use and religious purposes. The idea that artists were people equipped with a talent whose mission was to express their vision of the world would have been incomprehensible in those times. However, without these artists, the Camino wouldn't be what it is today. Our walking of the Camino as artists and art is a continuing of a long-standing tradition.
To be a pilgrim is in itself to embark in a 1,000-year-old tradition, a difficult condition to enlist from a college-age person, daydreaming of eating churros con chocolate chased by a glass of wine. At the end of our series of introductory meetings, we invite our students to pledge to be a pilgrim. This pledge is similar to the Pilgrim's Blessing in that it is a performative uttering. That is, as in the words of J.L. Austin, is not to describe, but is to do. Through the pledge, students are enacting a promise as individuals and between the group to be more than spectators, and by definition, tourists, ritualizing the behavior towards a kind of fulfillment. As a conceptual script or performative score, the students commit to set aside their culturally constructed identity as a university college student of a predominantly white Research 1 institution of the American South, to take on that of the pilgrim. Committing to be a pilgrim reinforces the idea that they have entered an engagement with the world in which they are part of, not just in perceptions, but in the unifying of the self into a complete body. The body is a means by which the world or the other is perceived, the measurement, to use Merleau-Ponty's term, at the center where all perceptions and thoughts are given meaning. The body is also the container that holds historical, cultural, and political memory in ways we strain to explain. The totality of the program, from its inception with its invitation, to the travel, to the walk, to the chinches, to the blisters and the sunburns, all become part of an immersive, discursive practice to open that container and fill it with new memories. Uttering the invitation is a commitment, one that can bring a student closer to the experience of a voluntary pilgrim. Once the students arrive at St. Jean-Pied-de-Port, we join together to not only discuss the start of the next day, but to foreground the crossing of the border from France to Spain. This moment is used to discuss the nature of diaspora and its impact on identity. A map of the Camino de Santiago, along with 2 others from separate news articles, are sent to them in preparation for the walk. The first map is of the Syrian refugee walk via Turkey into Europe. And the second is the Guatemalan migrant path to the US border in California. This visual frames their journey across the French border into Spain. And upon arriving to Roncesvalles, the students have an intimate relationship with those 2 maps and the people they represent. Once the students are firmly in the routine of the Camino, I incorporate a series of performances and performative tasks as a method to further delve into the skin of a pilgrim. Like an onion skin, we peel the layer back, layer upon layer. By the time they reach Santiago, students are generating their own ritual, performing in public a symbolic gesture to their own personal journey.
Before learning to render the landscape, we first learn how to read it. In reading Natural Spaces, we can define what landscape drawing actually is and why it still matters in this age as an artistic genre. Through traditional practice of plein air, meaning in the open air, we adopt certain methods that help develop the cerebral process of sighting and measuring and comparing. It may come as no surprise at that point that a drawing has little to do with rendering and more to do with what is being perceived. It is a hybrid of manual craftsmanship and an immediate method of abstract visual thinking, the translation of mental images into physical ones. The students take part in imagining how the landscape might have been perceived through the eyes of the medieval pilgrim. How might their experience of the landscape change by walking through it rather than recording it? How might the experience of studying it shape the expectations of the pilgrim? Another question that we ask our students to interpret is, what do they think the land would have to say to us if it could speak? What do they think past generations of pilgrims have experienced in those particular landscapes? Through careful observation, we investigate the development and manipulation of the land and consider ways that the notion of place was paramount in the medieval fashioning of spirituality. Walking through and drawing the landscapes becomes like getting to know a new friend, introducing yourself to it and perhaps bringing it a token of appreciation, keeping our senses tuned into what the site may be trying to tell us, stopping short of having a conversation with it. This prepares the students emotionally, psychologically, and physically, because what we feel as pilgrims is very much determined by what we bring to the path. Purposeful preparation in landscape drawing becomes the prerequisite for having any type of meaningful dialogue with these spaces and all of their histories. Over the course of 6 weeks, the students are taken through a curated view of pilgrimage, one that challenges them to negotiate not only the course content, but the world around them. We utilize the pilgrimage as a space for transformation, to treat each student as a material, asking them to engage with the pilgrimage in an intimate and authentic way, to let go of the fear of missing out, or to let go of their phone, to let go of egocentric worldviews that do not engage with history, culture, and identity, to let go of not being able to ask for help, or to let go of the need to be heard across the field at full volume all the time, to let go of worldly things like cool clothes, shoes, or even makeup, to let go of judgments on others, and to let go for one's own peace of mind. We're there not only to pose questions, but to serve as a guide through their emotions, misconceptions, and internal conflicts. And this role is something that we feel is very important, unpacking the challenges for the students as they struggle against their own limited perceptions, knowledge, capacity for empathy, and perceptions projected upon them. While they generate work for themselves, they're also generating work for us, ephemeral, trace elements. In relation to our praxis, each student is a trace of the experience, much like charcoal upon the page. So as we implied in the beginning, what does walking as art produce if it is not found in the work that they create? If we view the Camino de Santiago as a site for creative inquiry, then each student on the pilgrimage is a work of art in and of themselves, with traces of the experience leaving marks upon them. In the words of Hamish Fulton, a walk has a life of its own and does not need to be materialized into a work of art. An artwork cannot represent the experience of a walk. The entirety of the program, from when they left the States and uttered the words, "I will be a pilgrim," to the project prompts and the long arduous path to Santiago, all serve as a vehicle in generating a transformative experience and generating a deeper and richer relationship with the natural world around them, leaving them unable to not look back.